Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our final evening of our Birds of Newfoundland series. It's nice that you've stuck it out with us till the end here, and I'm excited we're going to talk about birding by ear tonight. So it's a little bit different than our other weeks, but I think it's going to be hopefully interesting for you all. If anybody's new tonight somehow, my name is Jenna McDermott. I work for an organization called Birds Canada, as does Catherine Dale, who is here monitoring the chat and other technology issues, that sort of thing. And as I said, we both work for Birds Canada, which is a nonprofit organization that is a national organization, and we have a mission of driving action to increase the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada. And so a lot of what we do relies heavily on citizen scientist involvement. And so citizen scientists are basically regular people who have an interest in this case, conservation, who collect data to put into the programs that we run. So each year in Canada, we have over 74,000 volunteers who are sharing their time and their energy and their knowledge with us to help us run our conservation programs so that we can, in the end result, help conserve birds. So this is probably really old news for all of you at this point, but in Newfoundland, we're running two different programs. The first one is the Newfoundland Breeding Bird Atlas. And the Newfoundland Breeding Bird Atlas is a 5-year program where we are mapping where all of the bird species are that breed on the island of Newfoundland. So you can see in the top corner, we have a map of where the greater yellowlegs have been found so far. And the different colors in those squares, if you can see them, tell us how certain we are that they're breeding in that area rather than just sort of passing through, for example. Since we are a nonprofit organization, we are funded solely by donations and grants. And so if you've been coming out the whole time and you want to show your appreciation for this webinar series in any way, you can feel free to donate to our program, which we would appreciate, but is not required, of course. And so you could do that by going to our website, nf.birdatlas.ca, click on the Get Involved tab, and then you can go to the Donate section. So thanks for anyone who does that in advance. It's much appreciated. The other survey that we're doing in Newfoundland, or program, sorry, is the Atlantic Nocturnal Owl Survey. And so that is another citizen science survey. It's happening actually right now. Catherine might be able to speak if there's any routes open still or not, if anybody wants to get involved. It's basically a survey where you go only one night a year from the 1st of April to the 15th of May, and you drive a 20-kilometer section of road with 10 stops, and you play a track and listen for what owls are calling back to you. So it's pretty cool, lots of fun to get out and see what's happening at night in the early spring, and it's also one that is a volunteer survey. Before we carry on to the birding by ear, I would like to acknowledge that the lands that we're running these programs on are the ancestral and unceded territories of the Beothuk people, as well as the Mi'kmaq people. And these people have been protecting, of course, the island for time immemorial. And through our work, we're just hoping to sort of increase and help with that stewardship in Newfoundland to steward all of the species that we share the island with. And finally, I would just like to thank all of our partners and funders. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to put on webinars like this or run our programs at all. It's certainly a joint effort of money and time. And so thanks to all of these folks on here. All right, so this is our outline for the evening tonight. So we're not going through like a huge list of species because we spent how many weeks? 10 weeks, I think, going through all of the species. We obviously can't go through what all of those birds sound like tonight. So we're going to go through what sounds birds make and why they make them. We'll go through the basics of how or what to look for or listen for, I guess, when you're birding by ear. We're going to talk about how to visualize birdsong. we'll do some practice. We'll go through around 10 species tonight. We'll talk about technology that you can use for bird song identification. We'll have a little quiz at the end, and I'll give you some resources that you can use to keep practicing or learning your birds as well. So the first thing we'll go into are the different types of bird songs, or bird sounds, sorry. The first one that we'll talk about is songs. And so each species of bird has its own song, and we've gone through some of them in the past week. And each of those songs is distinguishable within a species to all of the individuals within a species, and also to humans, especially for ones that are the simpler songs, or if you have a lot of practice. So I'll play for you right now the black-throated green warbler song, who is this buddy up in the corner. I think he'll sing again. So that's the black-throated green warbler, the song. And it's quite a distinct song. It doesn't sound really like any other species that we have in Newfoundland. And so that makes that really a nice song for us to learn, but sort of gives you an idea of what parts are making up a song. So often there's some variation between individuals on the species songs, and they are usually sort of pretty complex with lots of notes put together in different sections sometimes. Sometimes they have repeated parts, and they're typically very melodic or musical. And that's sort of what makes up a song. Songs are used mostly for mate attraction. And so they're used for mate attraction because singing is actually really energetically expensive for a bird. So if you ever watch a bird singing, you'll note they're not just like moving their beak a little bit. They're using their whole body to make this huge sound. So it takes up a lot of energy. And so it can indicate to a female how healthy a male is or how good he will be at defending a territory, because he has all of that energy to make a lot of song. So being a good singer is actually really important for males to have a successful breeding season. Singing can also be used to defend territories. And so birds will sing to tell other individuals that they own a certain section of habitat. And individuals can recognize the specific variations in song, even if it's so slight that we can't even hear it as humans. They can tell their neighbors' songs apart from a stranger's song. And so once they've already decided on their territory boundaries, they don't have to respond with a fight or an altercation with their neighbors who they already know are around, unless they're encroaching on their territory. If a new singer arrives that they don't recognize, though, that could start something more elevated in energy, like a physical chase or a fight, that sort of thing, since that's an unknown individual who could be trying to take over some territory. And so in that way, an individual bird knowing the songs of its neighbor birds can help it save energy. And that's another reason why we've talked, I think, a couple of times about not using playback for attracting birds, because it's actually very disruptive to their normal life. So we're not just playing a song and having them come over and look at it. They're actually thinking there's an invader into their territory, right? And so they're coming in with the intention that they might need to fight something off. We're disturbing their natural sort of activities for the day. And so that's why we try not to use song playback to try and bring birds in for just our enjoyment. The timing of bird song is typically, at least in North America, just during the breeding season. And for time of day, we're talking about the dawn chorus and the early morning. So they'll take a break during the middle of the day, and then they might sing again in the dusk before nighttime. I'll also just quickly note that in the past and up until fairly recent years, most of the time birdsong has been researched or noted in males because they're often more out in the open and more obvious about it. But actually, a lot of female birds do sing as well. And so one really popular one that people talk about in North America, although they aren't in Newfoundland, is the northern cardinal. And so males and females both sing. And females will sing for the same reasons as males. They could be singing to attract males into an area where they're occupying, or also to defend a territory from the other females as well. And so down in the tropics, a lot of females do sing as well. And it's sort of more talked about there since they defend a territory through the whole year. So having both the male and female singing can really help with territory defense. But we're really just starting to learn about all the different species where females sing in North America, or not in the tropics, I guess, right now even. So the list is growing. There are a lot of species that do that, and there's probably more that we don't even know about. Okay, the next type of bird song, or sorry, I keep saying that, bird sound that we'll talk about are calls. And so we typically break things up into songs and calls. So I showed you the song of the black-throated green warbler in the last slide, and now I'll show you its call. So it's just that tiny little chip note, really. It's very simple, it's short, and it's quite difficult to learn. So that's why when we are birding by ear, we're typically starting with songs rather than calls. So for humans, songs are often more useful for knowing what species are around, just due to the difficulty in telling calls apart. But for birds, calls are incredibly useful, and they have a lot of different uses. So there can be different calls that are contact calls. So contact calls are typically used between a mated pair who are sort of chatting with each other throughout the day just to see where they are. They can be used between individuals during flight and migration. We also have begging calls, and those are the calls used by chicks when they are begging for food from their parents. So they're trying to convince their parents to feed them. And so we have a little nest of northern flickers in this picture here, and I'll let you listen to what those chicks sound like when they're begging. Maybe it will work. Okay, just a second. So begging calls are typically very insistent, and they last a really long time. That's because the amount of begging actually can directly relate to how much they're being fed. So there was a study done in Europe where chicks that begged louder were given more food by parents. So if you have a nest of birds, you're often going to be hearing these really loud, insistent begging calls. We also have calls that are used for alarm. And so they make alarm calls because of usually a predator being nearby to tell everyone to hide, alert the others. And then we also have calls that are used to prompt their young for a different reason. So adults will make a certain call that tells the young to do something like jump out of the nest for the first time when they're learning to fly, or to hide in the bushes, for example, if there's something around that they need to hide from. And in opposition to bird song, bird calls can be done or are done all year round rather than just during the breeding season, as well as all day long. So they're not really, bird song is much more concentrated in time as well as throughout the year. The last type of sound that we'll talk about is non-vocal sounds. And so these are things that are not being made coming out of the beak. They are things that are produced by other stuff, feathers and beaks that I have here on the list. And so we've talked a little bit about Wilson snipe before. Wilson snipe have a display flight where they actually pass air through their outer tail feathers, and they make this certain sound. So I'll play it for you. So that was a sound that they make from their feathers while they're flying. And there's the Wilson snipe up there in the top corner. And that's actually part of their mating display where the males are trying to attract a female. So it's sort of taking up the place of song for them. We also have a ruffed grouse here in the middle, standing on that log. And ruffed grouse also make feather sounds. So they do something called wing drumming, and it sounds a little bit like the low thumping of a generator, like starting off in the bushes quite far away. I personally almost feel it in my chest rather than hear it. That's how low it is. And they use that sound for territorial defense and mate attraction. So again, they're using it sort of in replacement to a song. We also have non-vocal sounds that are produced by the beak. So a really common one for that is woodpeckers. Woodpeckers will drum on hollow trees, on poles, on the siding of your house maybe, and they're really trying to make a loud noise. So this is not when they're looking for food. This is a specific drumming that they're using as part of territory display again, and to attract the mate or attract a mate. And so again, sort of functioning as a song. And because all of these that I've talked about are functioning mostly as a song would, the timing for them is typically during the breeding season as well. Okay. Something to be aware of when we're learning birdsong is that the same species can actually sound different in different regions of the world. So much like humans have different dialects or accents or different versions of words that they say depending on geography, birds have the same sort of thing. And that's because song is a learned trait. And so you can have these huge variations in song based on what they're learning from their local birds. And a really interesting case of this is the white-throated sparrow in North America. And so the white-throated sparrow in Western North America sings actually a different song than the white-throated sparrow in Eastern North America. And it is, the Western song is starting to travel farther and farther east, and it might already be in Newfoundland a little bit. But the ones in Western, the Western song sounds like this. And the Eastern version sounds like this. I think I maybe mixed those up. But one of them has eliminated, the Eastern one has eliminated one of the syllables in the song. And so if you're not familiar with it, they may have sounded super similar. But for those individual birds, that would be an incredibly different change. And so if you've learned, for example, songs in Newfoundland where you're living, or wherever it is that you're living, you might go to a different location and hear a bird that sounds maybe quite different, even though it is technically the same song, but it might just sound quite a lot different. So be aware of that when you're listening to recordings of songs, that it's always nice to look at the location, because if you can find Newfoundland specific songs, that will be most similar to what, of course, you'll find in Newfoundland. Let's talk a little bit about why you would want to learn how to bird by ear. And so, I mean, you're all here tonight because that's something that interests you, I hope. And so that's a first reason. But when we're actually outside in the world, looking for birds, most of the time we're actually going to be just hearing birds. And so somebody did a study in North Carolina in a forest there, and they found that when people were doing bird surveys, they were detecting 75% of birds by sound alone, and only 3% of birds by sight alone. So if those people couldn't recognize birds by their song, they would have missed 97% of the birds that were there. And so, when we mix sight and sound, then the numbers go up, of course. But if you're only able to see the birds, then you'll see, for example, in this habitat here, you see maybe the one bird in the bush close to you, but there's something singing over here in the forest and singing on the far side of the forest, and there's two other birds singing in the middle of the wetland here. And so birding by ear can really open your world to how many birds are around you. And the specific numbers of those percentages will change depending on what habitat you're in, the location you're in, but generally you are going to hear more birds than you will see. So you can get really a huge enjoyment from knowing what's around. And I personally really like being able to identify birds by their song, because even if I go to a brand new place and you're feeling, a little out of place, maybe, you can always listen to those familiar species and, you feel like there's some familiarity there, which is, a nice thing for me. It's also really fun if you can bird by ear. You can, lay in bed in the morning with the window open. You can hear who's out singing. You can go camping. You can be in your tent. You don't have to see anything. You can still hear who's around. And it's also a really great way for people who are visually impaired to get involved with birding as well. So I'm going to play a video. It's around um, 10 minutes, I think, of the vocal quality, how to describe birdsong, that sort of thing, from a colleague in Birds Canada who did a really great job of describing it. So I'm going to play this video for you to listen. Hopefully it will work for us here.
Birding by ear lesson 6.
Yeah.
Using sound to identify birds. Bird identification is the ability to recognize and pay attention to details. In this session, you will learn the main elements of a birdsong, strategies to learn and memorize bird calls, and essential resources to get you started. The one thing you will need to do is to find your learning style. Your birding by ear style is the best way for you to listen, learn, and remember songs. The best strategy is to start small, with a few calls of widespread and locally common birds. You naturally have more ready access to these birds, and by concentrating on the small number of species, you can begin to pick up details in the rhythm, pitch, patterns, and vocal quality of the songs. The small selection of common birds will become your building blocks. Each song you learn will provide insight into the next song you encounter. Let us go step by step. First, how to listen. Anyone who has a novel and intense experience, such as hearing many birds calling at the same time, could feel overwhelmed. To prevent this, you should focus on just one song. Next, don't try to get the whole song on one go. Get the clues little by little. First, feel the rhythm of the song. Then, note the pitch, and then feel the tone. There is no hurry. Second, what to listen for. Once you can get a good, clear listen of a bird song, start noticing the following properties of the call or song. Rhythm. Is the song fast or slow? Is there a change in speed in the song, or does it stay the same? Blue-headed vireos take their time when they sing, while red-eyed vireos sing in a hurry. Pitch. Is it high or low? Do you hear a variation within the song? The pitch is best compared with other species. Note if the song is rising or falling. Smaller species typically have a higher voice, and large birds, like a raven or a duck, usually have deeper voices. Some birds rise, as the black-throated blue warbler. Others descend, like a veery. Repetition. Try to find the pattern of the call or song. Some birds repeat phrases before they move to a new note. Ovenbirds make the same sound many times in a row, while chestnut-sided warblers say "please, please, please" 3 times before it ends in "to meet you." Vocal quality is the hardest but most critical ability to master for bird identification by ear. It is the description of a song. Many times I find descriptions and they make no sense to me until I hear the bird. You will have to find a way of describing the song. There are whistles, like the black-capped chickadee. Some songs are flute-like, such as that of a hermit thrush. Others sound more like a buzz, for example, a savanna sparrow. And others are more like a hoot of the mourning dove. Let us use the yellow warbler as an example of vocal quality. Listen to one of them. When it comes to rhythm, the song has a medium speed and it gets faster near the end. It's repetitive with a pattern. The pitch is emphatic and the vocal quality, it's sweet. And it can be described by the mnemonic, sweet, 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 sweeter than sweet. This brings me to the easiest birds to remember. Those, like the yellow warbler, that can be described with a mnemonic. A mnemonic is a phrase or group of letters that helps you to remember a sound. The yellow warbler is the perfect example. Did you hear the sweet, 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 sweeter than sweet? If you didn't, don't worry. I didn't either until the third time. Here it goes again. There are other aspects that you will perceive more intuitively. Pay attention to speed, volume, and length of the songs. Some will be very fast, while others will be incredibly short, and some will be so loud you can hear them echoing through the forest. Now that we are aware of some key elements, we should consider our own differences in learning styles. Some people may need to listen to a live or recorded bird vocalization over and over again in order to memorize the calls. Others have to find the bird in the field and see it vocalizing to be able to remember. Some listeners are able to hear a sound just once to remember it. For most of us, the most important thing is to draw on the sounds we already know and consider what made them stick. The goal is to start finding similarities and differences between birds. Consider the similarities and differences in sounds produced by different birds. Variation in voice follows specific patterns. Related species tend to have similar calls and songs. For example, the majority of warblers sound like they are warbling, while the majority of thrushes sound like they have very elaborate whistles. You will have to try to remember the songs so you can match them with a regional sound library afterwards. My final suggestions to improve the possibilities of remembering a call in the field is to try to create mnemonics that help you, like this bird. I would try and remember as whippoorwill. Another strategy can be to imitate the call. You might discover that you are a brilliant bird imitator. You can also use technology. The majority of cell phones have incredibly directional microphones for recording the mysterious bird so you can listen again later at home for identification purposes. Birding by ear lesson 6.
Okay. We'll go along on our own again now. But that was a good overview, I think, by Andres about what sort of things we're going to be listening for or paying attention to while we're learning birdsong. And some things that he mentioned that I'd like to sort of restate, I guess, are that birding by ear is quite a difficult task because as humans, we're not as good at picking out sounds as we are at visual things. And sounds can also be, or can appear differently to different people. They're really hard to describe with words and they're hard to remember. So a lot of these things are quite subjective in how we describe them. So it is going to take time, of course. You're not going to learn all of the birds in like one summer. that you're hearing. And so you have to approach it with patience. I mean, I am still learning birdsong. If I go to a new place, for example, or some species that I haven't heard very often. So it can be like a multi-year kind of project. So the important thing is to have patience with yourself and start slowly. So it's really good to start listening to the birds that are sort of around your area, around your house, around your cabin, that you can hear out the window, that sort of thing. And so much as we did with learning to identify birds by sight, you start with your common ones like the American robin, blue jays, that sort of thing that are around all the time. You can do the same thing with bird songs. And sometimes it just takes, a certain amount of practice or a certain amount of time, or a certain amount of other bird song identification to make a certain species click. For example, myself, I could never tell apart the difference between a black-capped chickadee and a boreal chickadee song. I would listen to recordings of both and they sounded the same to me. And everyone was trying to say, this one sounds more gravelly, this one sounds more grumpy, this one sounds more whatever word they used, and I just couldn't hear it until like 2 years later, and suddenly I could hear the difference. So sometimes having a little bit of birdsong vocabulary in your head or a certain amount of bird songs in your repertoire, it can help you learn other ones later. And then another thing that we can do while we're learning to bird by ear is visualize song. And so for those who are more visual learners, it's sometimes nice to be able to see what the song looks like sort of in front of your eyes. So we can do that by looking at what is called a spectrogram. And these two here are different spectrograms. The top one is for a hermit thrush. The bottom one is for a savanna sparrow. And so you can see right off the bat, those two species sort of song signature looks very different. And so spectrograms are a really nice way of visualizing or seeing sound. So what we have in a spectrogram is it shows you the volume, the pitch, and the volume, the pitch, and the duration of the song and the duration of pauses between songs. So I'll play the hermit thrush for you. That's the one on the top. So that was the hermit thrush, and you could hear there was 3 groupings of sound, and you could see the notes sort of going up and down. It's very fast for what is shown here on the spectrogram because it's really picking up all of the complexities that we can't necessarily hear with our ears. And so on a spectrogram, things look darker when they're louder and they're lighter when they're quieter. And the pitch is up here on the vertical axis, and the time is on the horizontal axis. So if you look at a spectrogram, if that's something that's useful for you, that's a way to easily examine parts of the song in detail so you can sort of compare to other songs. And so here, I'll let you listen to the savanna sparrow underneath, and you can sort of follow along how that looks on a spectrogram as well. So that's quite a different sound, and it also appears very different when you're viewing it to the hermit thrush. Okay, so like everything, practice makes perfect. So we're going to go through, I think I have 10 species, and I think most of them are fairly common species, and we'll go through talking about the pitch for each of them, the speed and repetition, the tone, and any mnemonics that I know about for each of these species. And of course, we're not going through all of the species that we know, as I said, but going through sort of thinking about these different pieces of song for these species can hopefully help you pick out differences in other species that you might hear when you're out and about. Having this sort of wording as well should help you if you're reading birdsong descriptions in your paper or online field guides, because sometimes they can be really confusing or really strange sounding descriptions. But if we're using some of that terminology, then it might help. help out a little bit. Topics like these with pitch and speed and repetition, that sort of thing, can actually get way more in depth than we're going to go into tonight. So for folks who are really interested in those like specific sections, there's a website called Earbirding, and I'd recommend going to that if you want to read more about it. They have a lot of information. Okay, we'll start with the American robin, because a lot of people sort of talk about it as the harbinger of spring. Everyone knows always talk about robin song. And when I first started birding, I had no idea what a robin sounded like. Of course, they'd been out in my neighborhood ever since I was a child, but I couldn't tell which of the songs I was hearing was the one that was the robin. And so I'll play the robin for you now. So that's the American robin. If we're talking about the pitch, you can see also in the spectrogram here at the bottom, we have multiple notes and they're both rising and falling. So there isn't like one note that it keeps repeating, anything like that. The speed is quite slow and steady. It has these very methodical way of singing. Again, for repetition, we have different sounds the whole time. It's not repeating any one note. Or anything like that. And the tone is a clear whistle. And so that's the same sort of whistle tone that we have for all of the thrushes, because if you remember, the American robin is also a thrush. A mnemonic that a lot of people use for the robin is cheerily, cheer up, cheerily, cheer up. So it sort of has those different phrases of song that we heard here. And I'll play it for you once more so you can see if you can sort of match that information up. Okay, so when we're talking about speed, usually when we say something is singing slowly, that means that you can hear sort of each note separately. So some of the species will have later. You won't actually be able to pick out each individual note if you were trying to count them, for example. Okay, let's go on to a very different sounding bird, the American black duck. So the pitch for American black duck, oh, let me actually play it for you first here. Okay, so the pitch for the American black duck is monotone. It's singing the same note every single time. It's funny to call it a song, I guess, for for these guys, but anyway, it's singing the same pitch every single time. The speed again is slow. You can count each of those individual notes very easily. And repetition is it is repetitious. So we're having the same sound repeated every time. It's not varying the speed or the pitch. The tone, a little hard to describe maybe. You can type it in the chat if you have a sound that you would call it. I would maybe say rough or nasal. Feel free to pop something in the chat if you have a different word that you feel like a duck could sound like. And a mnemonic for the American black duck could just be quack, because it sounds pretty much like what we'd expect a typical duck to sound like. So we'll say quack, and I'll play him for you once more. Okay, so that's our duck here for the night. Who we got? Oh, here we go. We'll move on now to the white-throated sparrow. So I did play him a little bit earlier, but I'll play him for you again right now. Okay, so if you followed along with that on the spectrogram, you could see all the different notes there. And so we can see the pitch for the white-throated sparrow is it has monotone notes. and then it rises and falls. So it sings multiple notes over again in different sections, I guess. The speed again is slow, so you could count each and every one of those notes if you tried. And we do have some repetition. So it sings a first opening note, and then it repeats the next notes over and over again. And the tone is a sweet whistle. It's quite clear. And a mnemonic that people use for white-throated sparrow is often, "Oh, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada." And so I'll play that for you again, and you can see if you can hear that. Okay. A really funny thing that I find in the later midsummer is that young birds who have left the nest are starting to learn the songs by listening to adults singing. And so when you get later in the summer, when the young birds have fledged and they're hopping around on their own, they need to practice before they can sing properly. And so sometimes at that time or early in the spring of the next year, you'll hear birds that sound a little bit off, sort of like, they're not quite used to how to sing yet. And so they'll sound really funny. Singing like variations or short variations on songs because they're just practicing. Okay, we'll go on now to the common loon, which is common loons. They do have quite a few different versions of their song, but I'll play one version for you here. And it's probably something that folks have heard if they have been around the lakes or ponds in North America. So this is what they are. I think he'll sing once more. Okay. So the pitch for that song of the common loon is first it rises, goes woo, and then it rises and falls in quick succession. Again, we have a pretty slow speed. You could sort of count all of those notes. It doesn't really have much repetition, although I guess it could repeat the end notes once in a while, but typically it's singing different notes. And the tone is sort of eerie or mysterious, I guess. Again, these are words that are really subjective to people. So that's why if it's described in a field guide, it might not necessarily sound like that to you in real life. I don't know of a mnemonic for the common loon. If anybody else does, feel free to share it with us. But I think they are quite distinct sounding, so maybe we don't need one for the loon. Okay, we'll talk about now the Savannah sparrow. So you might not be as familiar with the Savannah sparrow, but I'll go through a few other species now that are maybe less familiar, so we can explore some different patterns of pitch, speed, repetition, and tone. And so the Savannah sparrow sounds like this. I'll play it once more. Okay, so first we have a monotone section. You can see that in the spectrogram there at the bottom as well, where it's singing the same note over and over, and then it falls at about halfway or near to the end. We again have a slow speed. You could count each of those notes, and it is repetitive at the beginning, but then it sings different notes at the end. The tone for the Savannah sparrow, I would say, is buzzy or almost insect-like. It's not really what one thinks of if they're thinking about bird singing, but it is quite a distinct sort of tone. And the mnemonic that I use for Savannah sparrow is just its own name. They say Savannah. And it's really nice when birds say their own name because then it's maybe easier to remember their name. So I'll play him once more, I think. Okay, and then we'll move along to the purple finch. So the purple finch sounds like this here. Sort of a bit of a crazy jumble of notes, honestly. So you can see the sonogram jumps up and down very quickly. And so because of that, we say the pitch is variable. So there's not really any major pattern of falling or rising or even staying the same. It's all over the board. The speed is fast. We can't really count those notes this time. So we've got a fast song here. And we don't have any repetition. We have all different notes. And so when we have all different notes going quickly, we call that a warble. So the purple finch is warbling. The tone is quite bright though and rich, sort of joyful sounding. And again, I don't know how we would make a mnemonic for the purple finch because it's so crazy. So I don't have one of those, but I'll let you listen to him once more. Okay. Now let's talk about the junco. The dark-eyed junco is probably singing actually now. I think I heard him when I was in St. John's some weeks ago. So you might be hearing him already around town. So that sounds quite different from what we've been hearing so far tonight. The pitch is monotone, sings the same note the whole time. And that pitch, depending on individual, could be higher, it could be lower, and it also could be faster or slower, but it always has sort of a ringing quality. So to put those in our categories, we have monotone pitch. It's singing very fast. You can't count those notes. And it's singing the same note over and over again. And so when it's singing fast, the same note, we call that a trill. And you'll see that word in your field guides when they're describing the songs quite often if it sings like this. The tone is ringing. And so when you have sort of a trill of different species, it might have a different tone, and that's how you would probably start telling them apart. Again, I have no mnemonic for this because I don't know how we would say words that fast. So that's the junco. It'll play once more. All right, let's move on to another sparrow, the fox sparrow. And I'll let you listen to him first. So the fox sparrow is a really wonderful song. I love that. Their song. Their pitch is rising and falling, and the speed is slow again, so you could count each of those notes. It doesn't really have any repetition. It's singing different notes the whole time, and the tone is a rich whistle. I don't have a mnemonic for this, but there are some sort of clues that you can try and use to help remember what a fox sparrow sounds like. So Catherine here thinks that fox sparrows sound like they're drunk. My partner thinks that they sound sassy. And so if you can clue into some sort of association like that, it can give you also some help in remembering what that bird sounds like. So I'll let you listen to it again. You can see if they sound maybe drunk or sassy or something else. All right, so that's our drunk fox sparrows. Moving on to the black and white warbler. So a lot of people describe them as a squeaky wheel. I will let you listen to him. Okay, so the black and white warbler has a pitch that's alternating high and low. So it's go. Well, you just heard it. It alternates high and low. You can see it also there in the spectrogram. The speed is quite fast, and it is repeating two note phrases. So it's repeating that high low over and over and over again. The tone is kind of squeaky or like high pitched, and the mnemonic is not really words, but it's sort of a description, which is that squeaky wheel that I mentioned. So it's as if that wheel's just squeaking as it goes around each revolution. And so I'll play them for you again, and you can sort of watch that on the spectrogram. Great. We'll move on to a totally different sort of bird, the belted kingfisher. And I included this one because I think it's probably a sound that folks have heard before, but probably didn't even know maybe that it was a bird or that it was a kingfisher. So this is what he sounds like. And I shouldn't say he because males and females both would sing this same song. And so the pitch for this is monotone. You can see on the spectrogram, it's just across the whole board there is the same note. The speed is fast again. We can't count those notes. And it is repetitive. It is repeating that same note the whole time. The tone for this is sort of a dry rattle. And again, I don't have a mnemonic, but I do think it just sounds like a rattling very fast. So I'll play them once more before we move along. And they actually sing that song as they're flying. So if you're, along the edge of some sort of water body, you can hear that going by sometimes and not necessarily be able to find out where he is. And I was on a walk the other day, a couple of weeks ago, and the kingfishers are back here in PEI, and I heard that sound, and he was so far overhead, actually, much farther up than I expected. So if you're trying to look for your kingfisher, and can't find him, maybe look up as well. Okay, that was our last bird, but we do have some more information for the night. And so we're going to talk a little bit about technology and birdsong now. And so technology can be really helpful when we're learning to bird by ear because it can really help take out some of that subjectivity. You can record an unknown song or a song you want to listen to more, and then you can bring it home with you to ask someone else or to look up online. And so that sort of avoids all of the uncertainty about trying to describe what the sound was like to another person. So there's a few different resources we can use for this. And the first one that I'll talk about is automated song ID. And so there's a free app that you can get on your phone or other smart device called Merlin, and it's by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And it can function as a few different things. It can function as a field guide, and we've talked about that back way at the beginning of this webinar series. And but it can also, you can click on the sound ID button there that's on the opening screen of it that you can see on the right, and you can actually use it to record in real time, and it will pop up when it hears a bird what species it thinks it is. And so that can be really nice, especially for sort of those more common species, more distinct species. It can pop up with a bird identification for you. So I know a lot of people really love this app, and it is really helpful. A few disclaimers, or just one disclaimer, I guess, is sometimes it's wrong. So especially birds, species that are a little bit harder to tell apart from other species, sometimes it can get them mixed up because it's just using recordings that are, it's sort of auto learning recordings. And so if we have trouble identifying them, it might also have trouble identifying them. But if you're into your more common species that are more easily identified, it's often pretty good. It sometimes will also like use a non-bird sound and make it into a bird. So for example, one of our field technicians used to take it out and use it when there was sort of an unknown bird around. And sometimes it would come up in the middle of the boreal forest that there was a pigeon calling all the time. She was like, there's definitely no pigeon here. There's no pigeons living in the woods. And it ended up at the end of it all that it was her stomach rumbling and not a pigeon at all. So just take its identifications with a grain of salt, but it's a really great place to start learning or comparing. And if you can get it to listen and then find that bird to confirm, it can be really, really great. You can also use your smart device to make recordings, as Andres said in the little video. And so you can record that bird, bring it back, compare it to sort of song libraries, or ask a friend who's maybe more familiar with the species. We also can use handheld recorders that are more advanced, I guess, than like a smartphone, for example. And so this picture is of a handheld Zoom recorder that we have at the Atlas office. And so basically you just attach it to a tripod, put that little windscreen on top that looks like hair, and you can press start and record everything around you. Of course, it also records you if you're making a whole bunch of noise, but if you start it and stop it, then you just have a file on an SD card inside there that you can take back inside and listen to whenever you want to identify those birds. And there's lots of different kinds of handheld recorders. This is just one example. So you could have a smaller one that you literally just hold in your hand and record as you're out and about. But you could have this more sophisticated, I'll say, setup. Okay, there's also things called automated recording units, or ARUs. And these are likely not things that individuals are going to have on their own because they're quite expensive, but they can be really helpful and useful for bird research and researchers. And so basically it's this box attached to the tree in the picture. It has two microphones, one on either side. And it is exactly what it says. It is automated and records anything. And so we use them for birdsong because you can set a schedule and you can set it out, leave it out for weeks or months or even years if you wanted to, depending on the battery life. You put SD cards in it, and then you can schedule when it will turn on and record song. And so it's not recording the whole time, it's recording when you tell it to. And then you go collect that unit at the end of whatever time you left it out for it. And then you have this SD card again filled with recordings from when you had that out in the woods or wherever you put it. So that's really, really nice when you can't get people out there listening for birds, but you want to have some sort of more long-term monitoring. Okay, so that's all of the stuff about technology. We're going to go into our little quiz for the evening here. We have, oh, I can't advance my slide. Here we go. We have just 5 birds here tonight. And it's all going to be bird song, of course. And I'm only going to ask you about birds that I included in this evening's presentation. So let me open up the pool here. Okay. I was also really mean, and I have included all 10 species that we talked about tonight in your answers. So hopefully you don't all hate me. But here is the first bird. Okay, most people have answered. If anyone wants to get a last answer in there, I'll leave it open for 5 more seconds. Okay, close this out. And we have a consensus that this is a common loon. Well done. I think that's probably a song that's quite familiar to people. For me, it's very comforting, a very comforting song. And I'm glad that you all can identify the common loon. Okay, and let's do our next one. Oh, here's the answer, common loon. Okay. Try and play that again. Hopefully it doesn't show the answer. I'll play it once more. Sorry, there is one other species that's singing there in the middle or end of it, but we're listening for the main species in here. Okay. Folks, get your answers in if you have a guess. I'll close it up in just a few seconds. I think most people have answered. All right, let's see what we got here. Having 10 options is a lot, isn't it? Okay, so we have, most folks said American robin. This is an American robin, so well done for that. The Savannah sparrow sounded almost sort of more insect-like, very buzzy, and it was almost like a trill at the beginning of that. The purple finch does have a very similar sort of tone to it, that sort of very rich kind of tone. But the purple finch, it really does that crazy warbling up and down where you can't even describe sort of where the sound is going. And the fox sparrow, again, yeah, I could see where the similarity is coming from there. It doesn't have any, the American robin has some gaps in between its phrases. So it says cheerily, cheer up, cheerily, and has those gaps in between. The fox sparrow just sings straight on through without any gaps. Those are all great guesses. But this was the American robin. Okay, let's move on to our next one. Okay. Okay. Remember, it's all for fun, so you can just make a guess if you can't remember this guy. But a lot of people say it sounds like a squeaky wheel. Play it once more. Okie dokie. I will close this up now and show you what we have. So we did have a black and white warbler here. So he's the one that does that squeaky wheel sound, that alternating high and low note. And it's just generally also very high, even the low note is very high. The junco sings only one note all the whole time, monotone, that trill. Savannah sparrow, again, sort of that insect-like, he says kind of his own name, Savannah. And white-throated sparrow says, oh, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada. So we had here the black and white warbler. All right. Let's see what our next one is. Okay. play him again. And I think most folks have answered, but if anyone else wants to get an answer in, I'll play him one more time. Okay, I'll close that up and show everyone. And this is indeed a white-throated sparrow. I guess I sort of gave it away just now, the last question. So he says, "Oh, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada." And we just had someone with a fox sparrow, so that's a good identification of family. It is a sparrow indeed, but this one was a white-throated sparrow. Okay, we're on to our final bird species. And let's play it here. I'll just keep playing it for a little while. Play it once more, and then we'll close this poll up. Okay. Let's see what we got here. So we have almost 90% of people saying belted kingfisher, and it is this kingfisher with that dry rattle. So he'll be flying along, or she will be flying along the edge of the water, making that dry rattle. The dark-eyed junco does sing only one note over and over again. That is true, but it has a very ringing quality to it, rather than this really dry, rattly quality. And the fox sparrow sings a whole bunch of different notes. Okay, well done, everybody. Having 10 species to pick from is probably, a little harder than our usual 3 or 4. So that was really great. And I hope that you feel a little bit more confident that you can start identifying some of these species that you have around the neighborhood. For the last slide here, we'll just quickly talk about some resources that you can use to help while you start learning some more about birdsong and feeling more comfortable about it with them. And so on the bottom left, we have some song libraries. So basically, this is a collection of songs that that you can listen to that are often broken up, well, that are always broken up by species, but are often also broken up by location. So the Macaulay Library, you can just type any of these into Google and they'll pop up. The Macaulay Library is attached to eBird, which is where a lot of birders and birdwatchers put their birding information. So you can also upload song files or pictures. And so the Macaulay Library has song files from all across the world of different species. So you can search for a species or you can search for locations, that sort of thing. Xenocanto.org is another library where people can put in their own observations. And you could also put in an unknown thing there and other people can comment on it and sort of put in their thoughts about what species they are. And this one's nice because you can choose by a map location where you want to listen to recordings from. Dendroica is a collection of songs. Again, you can use it to look at different locations, and it just has like a whole lot of different recordings for different species, so it's nice. And then the Merlin app that we talked about before, apart from having the sound ID portion, it also just has within each species some different recordings of songs and calls as well. So you can use that for free on your phone. Over on the right here, we have different quizzes that you could use if you're more into, practicing by trial and error. So there's one called Larkwire, and it's partially paid, and it's sort of a game format. So a lot of people really like that. I haven't used it much myself. Um, Dendroica, again, is the same as the one I had on the left for the song library. You can also make little quizzes on there. You do have to make an account to make a quiz, but it's free. And then you can sort of make different collections of species, and you can quiz yourself on the bird songs, or also on bird pictures as well, if you want to quiz yourself on those. And then there's another game that is called Birdsong Hero, and it's for free as well. And I don't remember if I've tried that one out or not before. But you can take a look at that and have a little game of birdsong. Okay. I will put these actually into a follow-up email and send them to you. I know you haven't gotten any emails in a little while. Things have been pretty crazy, but I will definitely send these ones out. So you don't need to scribble those down if you haven't already. Okay, and that is all for the evening. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming out tonight and for coming out this whole past 12 weeks if you've been with us since the beginning. We really appreciate it, and we love having people learn about birds from us. So yeah, feel free to reach out with any questions, or if you want to get involved in any of our projects. And we are happy, as I mentioned, to accept donations, but that is not required. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop up now or put them in the chat.
Thanks, Jenna, for an awesome presentation as always. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. I'm mostly just seeing many thanks.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so I'll just echo what Jenna said. We really appreciate you guys coming out all these weeks. I think a lot of you have been with us since we started in January. So we finished just in time for you to actually use your birding skills. Get out there and see what you can see over the next little while. I know spring's a little slow to come to Newfoundland, but it's coming. I really need to believe that, despite the rumors of a snowstorm later this week. So yeah, I hope you guys have a chance to use what you've learned.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that spring comes slowly means that birds come in slower, maybe at the beginning. So it's a good time to start learning because you're not so overwhelmed with everything smacking in June.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks again, Jenna. Thank you for doing a great job of finishing us off.
And we hopefully will all be in touch with you another time. Have a great evening.